Hello, and welcome to the Book Reviews Kill recap and discussion of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Today we'll be covering Book 1, The Way of Kings, from Prelude to the Stormlight Archive to the end of Part 1. "4,500 years ago, a catastrophic war known as the Last Desolation ended when mankind fought victoriously against their enemies, the Voidbringers. Devastated by the war and mass casualties, the herald Kalak rendezvous with the king of the heralds, Jezrien. All other heralds have renounced their oath pact and abandoned their shard blades. Determined to keep their departure a secret, Jezrien and Kalak leave their legendary swords, honor blades. Kalak feels guilt for abandoning the 10th and last herald, whose shard blade is missing. 4,500 years later, Seth, a truthless Shin assassin, waits quietly in a large room, watching the Alethi celebrate the signing of a peace treaty with the Parshendi. He leaves the room, noting that his Parshendi masters will soon withdraw. Seth wears white under the orders of the Parshendi to follow their traditions so that King Gavilar could see him coming. When he reaches the area just outside the king's quarters, Seth uses his ability as a surge binder to fight his way past the guards. As he reaches the king's quarters, he is confronted by a shard bearer as the king flees. Seth fights his way past the shard bearer, but soon realizes that the shard bearer, not the man he is chasing, is King Gavilar. He returns and fights him, eventually defeating him by causing the balcony he is standing on to collapse, mortally wounding him. Seth is nearly killed in the fight. When Seth tells Gavilar the Parshendi sent him, Gavilar is confused and says, "The Parshendi? That makes no sense." Gavilar then gives Seth a strange black sphere and tells him, "You must take this. They must not get it." He then instructs Seth to tell Gavilar's brother Dalinar that he must find the most important words a man can say. As a Shin, Seth considers a dying wish to be sacred, so he leaves a note for Dalinar written in Gavilar's blood. He takes the sphere and flees. 5 years later, we meet Sen, a new recruit in Bright Lord Meridus Amaram's army. He is about to face his first battle and has no real idea of what to expect. Sen is pulled into a new squad, that of Kaladin Stormblessed, at the last minute for reasons he doesn't understand. Dalit, a sergeant, picks Sen up and returns him to the squad. They are soon joined by Kaladin, who asks Dalit to take care of Sen during the battle as he won't know the group's signals. They then fall to discussing tactics. The opposing force arrives and the battle begins. Kaladin's squad does not lose a single man. At one point, Kaladin single-handedly fights off 6 enemy spearmen to save Sen. When an enemy Bright Lord appears, Kaladin and his squad attempt to defeat him. They are hindered, however, by the arrival of an enemy shard bearer. Sen blacks out from blood loss, and the scene cuts out. 8 months later, Kaladin is now a slave in a caravan waiting to be sold and struggling to retain his ability not to think like a slave. When approached by another slave about escaping, Kaladin gruffly tells him that he has no plans to escape because it will never work. A second slave approaches Kaladin and asks how he became a slave. When Kaladin doesn't respond, the other men tell their stories. It eventually comes out that Kaladin killed a man, but the one he did not kill is the reason he's a slave. Kaladin idly toys with a leaf of blackbane, contemplating using it to poison Tvlakv, his slave trader. A windspren, in the form of a slender young woman only a handspan tall, speaks to Kaladin and wants to know what the blackbane is. Kaladin is surprised that she knows his name. As they converse, he observes that she is much more intelligent than a typical spren. When she asks why he doesn't fight anymore, he says that he has failed. Kaladin sees Tvlakv going to inspect a sick slave. Kaladin tells him that the man has the grinding coughs and will survive if given extra water. Tvlakv removes the man from the rest of the slaves, and Kaladin thinks he's going to give him water. Instead, a man named Bluth brutally murders the man. Kaladin is upset over his failure to save him. In his anger at the other slave's murder, he crushed the blackbane against the bars of the wagon. We now move to a city called Kharbranth, where Shallan Devar has just arrived. She experiences a culture shock, amazed at the number and variety of people in the city. After a short conversation with Captain Tozbek of the Wind's Pleasure, the boat she arrived on, she gets word that Jasnah Kholin, the woman she has been chasing for several months, is still in the city. Shallan and one of Captain Tozbek's sailors, Yalb, make the trip up to the palace so Shallan can speak to Jasnah. When they arrive, she asks Yalb to wait for her outside the palace. It is revealed that Shallan has requested to be Jasnah's ward, and that Jasnah told her to meet her in Dumadurai. Shallan has been chasing her from city to city ever since. Shallan is very nervous as her house's finances are in ruins since the death of her father, and if she doesn't find some source of income or other means of controlling their rival political houses, her house won't last long. She also reveals that her request to be Jasnah's ward is somehow related to resolving her house's crisis, though she does not make that clear. The chapter ends with Shallan turning a corner and seeing Jasnah. Kaladin is sitting in the slave wagon, waiting for the caravan to stop for lunch and noting that it's well after the time the caravan usually stops. After a few minutes, he realizes that this is because Tvlakv is lost. Tvlakv remembers that Kaladin was once an Alethi soldier and might have knowledge of the lands. When he asks Kaladin to help him find the way out, Kaladin tears his map to pieces and tells Tvlakv that he doesn't know the way out. In the conversation that follows, Tvlakv says he is only comfortable with the idea of Kaladin escaping because he knows he wants revenge on Bright Lord Amaram more than he does on Tvlakv. Kaladin realizes that if Tvlakv knows about Amaram, then he also knows that Kaladin isn't actually a deserter, in contrast to the official story given when he was sold. Tvlakv acknowledges this, but says that it's the story they will stick to because men who are guilty of high crimes are difficult to sell at a good price. A short time later, the Windspren comes back. She had apparently left during the recent high storm, but now tells Kaladin that there is a large group of people not far away. A few minutes later, Kaladin realizes that it's an Alethi war camp and that their destination is the Shattered Plains. The other slaves express hope that they'll be treated fairly in the war camps. Kaladin has his doubts, thinking of the many Light Eyes who have proven to be corrupt in the past. His one remaining hope is that he'll be allowed to fight again. We then switch back to Shallan, where she meets Jasnah Kholin for the first time. She admires Jasnah as the ideal beauty, tall, Alethi tan skin, long dark hair. She is talking to a man who Shallan later identifies as King Taravangian of Kharbranth. Jasnah and Taravangian seem to be negotiating over something, though Shallan can't tell what. As they begin to walk, Jasnah beckons for Shallan to follow. After a preliminary conversation, Jasnah mentions that because Shallan was so persistent about seeking her out, she will hear her petition to be her ward. Shallan is shocked, and she had believed that she had already been accepted as Jasnah's ward. A lengthy conversation about Shallan's level of education ensues, in which it is decided that Shallan has passing skill in most subjects, is very good in the sciences, excels at drawing and writing, which are feminine arts, and is sadly lacking in history and philosophy. They arrive at the entrance to a room which has been blocked off by a large fallen stone. Shallan realizes that the king's granddaughter is trapped in the room, and Jasnah is planning to use her soulcaster to remove the stone in exchange for access to the Polanium. Jasnah soulcasts the stone, transforming it into smoke. The king retrieves his daughter and, when asked, agrees to take Jasnah to the Polanium. Jasnah rejects Shallan as her ward because of her lack of education in history and philosophy. Shallan is frustrated, but decides to persevere. It is then that Shallan reveals that she wishes to become Jasnah's ward not out of scholarly pursuit, but in order to steal her soulcaster to help her family's finances recover. At the Shattered Plains, Kaladin and the rest of the slave caravan have arrived at the war camp of High Prince Sadeas. They are taken to a woman who is to decide whether she can use any of the slaves or not. When Kaladin tries to convince her to let him fight, Tvlakv tells her that Kaladin is a deserter, dashing his hopes. The woman decides that Kaladin and his companions are to be made members of the bridge crews. Kaladin and his new immediate superior, Gaz, take an instant dislike to each other, and as a result, Kaladin is placed in one of the worst locations on the bridge when they are called on a bridge run, without the benefit of shoes or a vest for protection. After several hours of agony carrying the bridge, they arrive at the chasm where the enemy Parshendi are waiting on the other side. They take volleys of arrows while placing their bridge. Kaladin is the only survivor in the front row. He wakes up hours later when the Windspren who's been following him shocks him with some sort of energy. Kaladin realizes that if he doesn't hurry, he'll be left behind. The Spren tells him that her name is Silfrena, or Sil. Though he is exhausted, Kaladin takes a spot on the bridge and begins the long way back to camp. Back in Kharbranth, Shallan is en route to the Millennium, hoping to convince Yasna that she is worthy to be her ward. She believes it's critical that she find a way to do so, as without her father, her family can no longer soulcast its way into wealth or manipulate others into doing as they want. She's allowed to wait for Yasna in her reading alcove, though she is denied access to the Millennium itself. While she waits, she sketches several memories from the past few hours, then writes a letter to Yasna containing arguments for her reconsideration. She's interrupted by an Ardent introducing himself as Kabsal. He asks to wait for Yasna with Shallan and praises her sketches highly. Kabsal tells Shallan that he is trying to convert Yasna, an avowed atheist, to Vorinism. He leaves, asking her to let Yasna know that he had come by to speak with her. She agrees and realizes that she's been there for quite a while and begins to gather her things, leaving the letter for Yasna. Before she can leave, however, Yasna appears in the doorway, looking displeased. Yasna scolds Shallan, telling her that she had already made her decision. Shallan is embarrassed that she disturbed Yasna again and leaves. After only a few moments, however, Yasna calls her back and apologizes to her and gives her Shallan's money pouch that she had left behind. Shallan asks Yasna to read the letter she had written for her earlier. Yasna is impressed that she is self-taught and agrees to accept Shallan as her ward once she has adequately learned philosophy and history. Shallan is pleased by this, but worries that she cannot learn fast enough to save her house. Shallan leaves the conclave and meets up with Yalb, who has been gambling with some guards. Yalb insists that she is talented enough to be accepted if she would just be more persistent, so she decides to buy some books on history and philosophy and return to start studying right away, planning to impress Yasna with her rapid learning just before Yasna leaves Kharbranth. Before long, however, she's interrupted by Yasna, who had paid the servants to tell her if Shallan returned to the Millennium. Yasna asks to see Shallan's satchel. When she comes across Shallan's sketches with notes on biology, she asks why she made them, to which Shallan replies that she wanted to. It is ultimately the fact that Shallan pursues scholarship in her free time, along with her persistence, that convince Yasna to accept her as her ward. Shallan reflects that she's completed the first phase of her plan, but now needs to discover how to accomplish the rest without being caught. Back at the Shattered Plains, Kaladin has now been a member of the bridge crew for somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks. Of the 25 who survived his first bridge run, only one other man is still alive. A few new arrivals are brought in, and Kaladin sees a young boy who reminds him of his younger brother Tien. In general, Kaladin is handling the transition to life as a bridge crew member poorly, snapping at Sil and becoming despondent. Sil leaves, unable to continue watching him in his current state. The bridge crews are called on another run, and the boy who reminded him of Tien is killed, as well as the only remaining man from Kaladin's first bridge run. Kaladin thinks to himself that he's dead inside, then proceeds to cry. The next chapter depicts Kaladin 9 years ago as a 10-year-old boy named Cal. Cal helps his father Lirin treat a young woman named Sani. He reflects over the course of the surgery on how his family is treated so differently because of his father's career. When they finish amputating Sani's middle finger, Lirin asks Kaladin why he was so late to arrive, and Kaladin replies that he was with a boy named Jam learning to use a quarterstaff. This sparks a debate between Kaladin and Lirin about the relative merits of being a soldier or a surgeon. Lirin meets Kaladin's claim that it's possible to save lives by killing others, with the assertion that doing so is like trying to stop a storm by blowing harder. Eventually, Kaladin stops arguing and goes back to cleaning up the room. Lirin quizzes him on various things a surgeon should know, then tells him that he plans to send him to Kharbranth to train under the surgeons there if he can find a way to do so. Lirin also tells him that he's incredibly gifted when it comes to surgery, and he shouldn't waste himself on soldiering. Back at the Shattered Plains, Kaladin is outside just after a high storm, going to the Honor Chasm to commit suicide. Gaz stops him, accusing him of trying to steal spheres left out in the High Storm from others, but Kaladin simply ignores him and goes to the Honor Chasm. Just as Kaladin is about to step into the chasm, Syl reappears, carrying a single blackbane leaf which she had brought hoping to make Kaladin happy. When Kaladin expresses his frustrations at his previous failures to protect people, Syl convinces him to try again, arguing that the bridgemen are going to die anyway, so his efforts cannot hurt. Kaladin returns to the camp and attacks Gaz, throwing him to the ground. He demands that Gaz make him bridge leader of Bridge 4, and that he give Kaladin full control of it. In return, Gaz receives 1/5 of Kaladin's wages. Kaladin then goes inside the barracks and begins asking the other bridgemen's names, noticing for the first time how pathetic they all are. All right, so we are recording right now. Our Yap session has begun. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this first episode in the Stormlight Archive recaps. Oh my god, I've been waiting for this since we started this podcast, and book 5 is coming out in a few months. Actually, we started this in August and book 5 comes out in December, but these books are door stoppers. They're gigantic, but they're actually pretty easy to get through. So I'm really excited to talk about all these books, but I want to introduce everybody that's in this chat. And also, we are going to kind of like have people coming in and out of this. This is a big project. I'll be here every time because I don't really have much going on. But it's going to be me a lot. And we have Jason, aka Easy Cat. We have Zoran, and we also have Aaron, aka Aaron's Archive. So that's the 4 of us today. So please introduce yourselves, everybody. Let's start with you, Zoran.
Oh, I was hoping I didn't go first. That's okay. Hi, guys. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Zoran. This is my second time on the podcast with Evan, and I'm so happy to be invited back. And I make bookish content on TikTok, Instagram, and sometimes, but not often, YouTube. I suck at that. But mostly reading sci-fi and fantasy, and I'm just happy to be here. And I'm so excited to be rereading the Stormlight Archive with you guys. 1, so I have someone to hold me accountable. And 2, it's been 4 years since I read the Stormlight Archive, so it's truly like reading these books for the first time again.
But you know how good they are.
So good.
It's almost better. All right, Aaron.
Okay, hi everybody. This is my first time ever being on a podcast, so I'm very nervous. My heart is pounding actually right now. I'm like gonna cry.
It's okay.
What am I doing? Oh yes, introduction. So yes, hi, my name is Aaron. I have been in the bookish space since about 2020. Mostly read fantasy and sci-fi, do kind of dabble in a bit of romance on occasion. I also live in the boonies next to Alaska in Canada. So that makes me really cool and awesome and special. I read these Stormlight Archives way back in like 2018. So I have very few memories and I'm very excited because I just know that they are amazing. And thank you, Evan, for inviting me on your podcast.
Of course. Thank you for being here. And Jason.
Hey, I'm Jason at EasyCat Online. I do content on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. This is my second time being on Evan's podcast. I was on his podcast a long time ago. We did like an interview, I think it was.
I remember that.
Forever.
Yeah.
This will be my second time reading books 1 and 2, but I've actually never read books 3 and 4, so it'll be my first time reading those. I read books 1 and 2 before Book Talk. I think before Book Talk even existed, before I was ever on Book Talk. And so, since joining Book Talk, I've read like literally hundreds of fantasy books. So I'm really excited to see how my opinion of these books has changed, if it's changed, since reading them for the first time, because the amount of books I had read when I first started Book Talk has changed dramatically. So I'm interested to see if my opinion of these books changes as well.
All right, I'm so excited for this, everybody. So as you heard in the recap, everybody, we went from chapter 1 up into the interludes. I was going to include the interludes, but I figured for the first episode, let's just keep it short and sweet. And short for a Sanderson book is the first 165 pages of the book. So this first section, part 1 of The Way of Kings, we start with a what is it? A prologue to the prologue to the prologue of The Way of Kings. So we have like 3 prologues technically, and then we start with Kaladin, and we have Shallan chapters as well. So I have a question for you guys. Like when we were starting out here, the first prologue, or I guess it's called like the Prelude to the Stormlight Archive or something like that. It starts with Kalek, and a big giant rock monster on the ground and all this crazy shit going on. Did anything ring a bell when you guys were rereading this? Like, was it all fresh? What did you think about this first part?
I didn't remember this at all. I read the first read, I was like, what? This happened? I remembered the second prologue part really well. Like, that is like a core memory of the series for me. That's like,
part.
Kinda, like still in my head. But that first part, I was like, was this added after I read it the first time? And I don't think it was.
What I gathered from, because I haven't read these books in a while either, and I've read the first, second, and third book, but I haven't read Rhythm of War yet. And so while I was reading like the Prelude, I was like, oh yeah, okay, so there was like this deal made, and there's like the Heralds and the Radiance, and I think there's like some kind of there's like some kind of reincarnation thing going on here, or something. I don't think that's even like a spoiler, but there's just like there's these guys that are just eternally tortured until like Voidbringers come back or like something. I was so hazy about it. There was like a really sad chapter to begin everything with. Like, I feel like there's like such an undercurrent of like kind of like melancholy and like doom throughout this whole series almost, where it's just like there's all these horrible things going on, look at these characters. But I think that the Prelude really, the whole point of the Prelude is to be like, okay, something way bigger than what is going on with all these characters is happening in the background, and it's just going to take a while for us to understand what all that is. But was it effective for you? I mean, were you like excited to keep reading after that, or were you just like, oh my god, what did I just get myself back into?
I was excited, but yeah, I do think it really starts it off with being like, wow, things are very bleak.
Yeah.
And things are going to be very bleak for a while, I think.
I was tortured for centuries.
Yeah.
And fired. Jesus. Oh my god.
But even when Sanderson writes like really high level world building stuff, I feel like what I like about his writing is it's still very digestible. Like, compared to some like first chapter prologues of like in the beginning, like some of them are so convoluted and so high level that you just walk away from that first prologue being like, well, I have no idea what any of that was about, but I guess I'll find out later. But, I feel like, you walk away from that Prelude at least having a concept of what just happened. And obviously you're going to get a lot of the holes filled in later, but at least you kind of walk away knowing the general concept of what just happened in those pages.
And then we move on to an extremely important scene, the scene that kind of sets up everything that's going on in the Shattered Plains for a while. And that's Seth's son Villano assassinating King Gavilar while Dalinar's all wasted. That was like when I kind of started remembering, okay, this is one of my things about Sanderson, that it's not a critique necessarily. It's just something that I've come to terms with Sanderson, and it's that with his magic systems are so thoroughly fleshed out and they're so intricate that sometimes I feel like he's just like, all right, you know what? I'm just going to tell you what this is. And we're not going to like try and thread it through like any dialogue, or I'm not going to do anything creative here. It's just, this is what this is. And it's going to take you out for a second. I'm sorry, but I have to explain this to you. Like, and so that's like the only thing that I like. It's like, not the only thing, but I remember reading that over again, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot Sanderson does this sometimes. Like, he does it in Mistborn, where he's just like, oh, and then this metal does this thing, and this metal does this thing, and then they flew through the air, and the reason that they flew through the air is because of all of these things. And it's like somebody kind of reading like a D&D book to you, or like a board game manual, and it's just like it kind of gives me that feeling of like when you're at a party or like you're at game night or whatever, and somebody's like explaining the rules to a board game before you actually start playing. And you're just like, oh god, we'll figure it out. Like, let's go. But you need to know. It's very crucial that you know. But that scene, oh my god, it's so exciting. It's so action packed. Oh,
I remember when I read that first chapter for the first time 4 years ago, and because obviously you read like the Prelude and you're just like, oh my god, you read the Prelude and you're like, who is Kalek? All these guys. And then you get to the next then you get to the prologue and it's Seth, and you're like, oh, surely this guy's the main character. Like, what's going on with him? And he's like, Sanderson's doing his Sander thing where he's like throwing the world building at you, like how you just said, where it's like, I just got to feed you this information one way or the other. And he's using like terms like, oh, a half lashing, a reverse lashing. He breathed in the Stormlight.
Yeah.
A full lashing. He waited 10 heartbeats for this shard blade to appear. And you're just like, okay, I'm taking notes. I'm trying to understand all of this. And then you get through the chapter and I'm just like, and you end up not needing to even remember any of those things. Like they end up, they're relevant, but for
like,
not for a thousand more pages.
Yeah, it's going to be a while before there's lashings again.
He's like, I'm just going to get your feet wet now.
Yeah, and then the whole like switch up where Seth like figures out that he's actually fighting Gavilar. I was like, oh, this is so badass, like this is so cool. And then he like brings this balcony down on him, which is just the visuals of it, like, oh god, he's so fucking creative, man. Like he's like Seth is just like walking on the walls and like throwing people around and stuff. And then there's this fight with Gavilar, and then at the very end though, it's so weird because Gavilar's like, you need to tell my brother this thing, and he says, tell him the most important words a man can say. And then Seth writes it in blood and then fucks off. And then you're like, okay, all right. And then it goes, like Zoran said, to another chapter with another character that you think is the main character. But we do see the main character in the next chapter. Did you have any other thoughts on the first prologue before we get into the second one? Go ahead, Erin. Yeah, just talk. It's cool.
I remember reading that chapter. Actually, The Way of Kings was my first Brandon Sanderson book that I read. I kind of read it in a bad order, but this was before Book Talk. I didn't know. And I remember reading that chapter, and it immediately, I was like, wow, this is what fantasy books should look like the action, the magic. I just remember being immediately hooked by it, and reading it again, I was like, yeah, I get it. It's just, I think it's really well done, and you're immediately you're invested.
That's why I think people love Sanderson so much, is because yes, he's throwing so much at you, but his actual like scenes are so interesting, and the way that he structures the action, and the way that he'll cut a chapter at like just like the perfect spot where it's like, that's all the information you need, we're moving on, but there's so much of it. And it's just, he's got such a way of structuring out these action scenes where it's like, it's never boring. And then it's almost like he knows when it's gonna be boring, because he could have kept that scene going where he's like, he has Seth like, running off and like thinking more things or something, and it's like, no, that was the high point, that's it, that's perfect, boom. It's like, and it's almost like he knows, okay, this is a ton of information, this is a ton of new stuff, like you were saying, Aaron. There's a magic system here, there's all these new characters, there's the Parshendi, there's the Parshmen, there's we're learning about Alethkar, and like there's like obviously some kind of like monarchy system going on here, and like there's like peace talks about something, I don't know what that is, and then Seth is just like internally thinking all this the internal dialogue where he's just like, oh, it's a sin to like cut into rock or whatever, and it's just like, dude, what, this world is so vast, like already, like there's already all these cultures like that are in this mixing pot, and we're just like in this room basically, and it's just like, it's gonna get, that's why I think that's why there's interludes, is because Sanderson was like, how do I do even more world building, more?
I was just gonna say, I really love that Sanderson explains things like the rules of a board game. It's actually one
of board games.
Yeah, it's actually one of my favorite things about him, because I think the opposite of that is fantasy authors who don't know how to explain what's happening, and because of that, there's a lot of fantasy books that I feel like I've read where I love what they're doing and I love their characters, but their action and their magic systems are very muddy, and often they'll have action sequences where it sounds really cool, but actually if you had to explain what's happening on the page, you couldn't, because they're just not very good at explaining all of those things. So I think the fact that he explains all these things makes it very easy to visualize, right? Like the opposite of Sanderson to me is like Gardens of the Moon. What's that author's name?
Steven Erickson.
Steven Erickson, who just doesn't explain anything well and then blames his readers, right? He's like, oh, it's your fault that you didn't understand it. It's not my fault.
Readers blame the readers.
Yeah, and the readers, oh, you're not smart enough to get it. I
Yeah.
would rather have it spoon-fed to me so that I can really just fully immerse myself and enjoy the scene rather than have it be like almost like the author is gatekeeping the action and the magic from me to make it seem more mystical. I would rather just give me all the information so I can fully visualize this as if almost like I'm watching a movie, which Sanderson is really good at.
That's basically what it feels like, yeah, because his blocking is so good. Like the way that he explains where the characters are, what they're doing, you know, and like you said, like it is a little bit spoon-fed, but yeah, I prefer that too. I mean, I'm personally I love Malazan, but I know exactly what you're talking about because there are parts of Malazan where you're just like, man, this would probably be really cool if I knew what the hell was going on, like if I had any clue at all. But yeah, I mean, Sanderson is just that there's a reason that he's the king of fantasy right now, and it's because these books are so damned accessible. Like Zoran and I were just talking about how quickly we read. Like this was nothing. Like 165 pages of some books is like, I feel like I'm tearing my hair out. But with Sanderson, it's just like, it's so damn easy. You know, like Zoran, how fast did you do this?
Like it was 8 hours of like the audiobook, but I think I listened to like 5 of those hours in like one afternoon. So like I was just going on with my errands, doing my chores, cleaning up around the house, and all of a sudden it was like Michael Kramer was like, end of part 1, and I'm like, fuck.
I know, I'm like literally gonna sit down and start reading this as soon as we're done with this episode.
But I wanted to say kind of like how going back to how Sanderson is just like a great writer. I think we often talk about in the book community and when we talk about fantasy books where like a common complaint a lot of people have within fantasy is like, oh, this author isn't good at world building, just any general author. And they're like, oh, like their world building, it's always like show, don't tell, which I think there's like a really delicate balance with like showing versus telling when you're feeding information to your reader, which is like sometimes you just got to like tell people what's happening, what things look like, how things work. And then there's obviously some things that you can show how things work. Like obviously you just gotta like give the reader some information. And I feel like Sanderson balanced showing information and telling us information like really well. And I feel like, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I don't get overwhelmed with like the information that he's telling us, if that makes sense. Like with the whole like lashings, like, oh, Seth did like, I can't even remember what he said, but he was like, he pulled Stormlight down and that made him go on the, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah,
like,
no, exactly. He's just like sucking in Stormlight. You're like, what the hell is Stormlight?
Down was up. I'm like, okay, how do you like show someone that? Like you just tell them.
Yeah.
And so I feel like Sanderson has a really good balance, or he knows when to tell people information versus showing them. And I feel like other authors in fantasy don't do, like inexperienced fantasy authors like don't have a great balance with that.
One of the things that I've learned over time writing my own stuff is mostly show, but it's okay to tell. You know, because the hard and fast rule, which you should never listen to with writing fantasy or writing anything, but like the hard and fast rule is always show, never tell. And it's like, dude, that's hard because like at the end of the day, you literally are telling 100% of it. You're writing it all down. Like there's no visual media. It's not a movie. You know, you actually are. It's called storytelling. You know, and so I agree with you, Zoran. Like he really does have such a good mind for, okay, it's time to dump a little bit of information. It's cool. I know exactly where to cut it. This is enough for them to get through this scene, and then we'll put some cool scenery around this. We'll do some cool world building and we'll make it epic, and then boom, we're done. Okay, we're moving on. Now we are in this other place with this young kid who is scared out of his mind because he's about to go into a battle. What did you think about Sen dying in that chapter? Like, because I didn't think that the first time I read this, I was like, oh, this kid is like the main character and we're gonna like see this world we're gonna see Kaladin through Sen's eyes. But no, that kid fucking dies, like, and it's really sad. Like he's like 15 or something.
I kind of like that we don't actually get introduced to Kaladin at the height of who he was, right? Like we get told a little bit about him, we hear about him, but we don't get introduced to him as a character in that spot. Like we meet him at his low point, and I think that is a better place to meet him, especially since, we're supposed to kind of be watching him like go through these struggles and possibly like start to grow back to who he was. I think it feels kind of like yo-yoing if you're like, here he is at his grandeur and now he's down here, but don't worry, he's going to get back. Like, I think it's good to introduce him in this very subtle way, because then when we actually meet him, it's at his low point, and that is really where his story truly begins. So I think it works very effectively to do that. But it does feel weird to have a third prologue after 2 prologues.
Only Sanderson, baby.
I never thought about it that way, but honestly, like for the way that we meet Kaladin, but it makes so much sense because at the beginning of Kaladin's first chapter, you get the 8 or 9 months later, and all of a sudden, like you see Kaladin at his low point, and then as a reader, you're trying to fill in the gaps of what you think might have happened in those past 9 months. How did he get in this slaver's wagon? How did he get captured? What crime did he commit? Like, how did he get those slave brands on his forehead? And I think that's also like a really cool thing that Sanderson does, is like he's making you use your imagination.
Yeah, and he's not giving away the whole farm. Like, we just had a conversation about how he does a lot of telling sometimes, but it's like, no, he's playing the long game with you. Like, and then towards the end of this read that we have here, we get a little bit of a Kaladin backstory, and it's like, damn, dude, you're juggling this now too. Like, you're doing backstory stuff. And my first time reading this, I was a little bit unsure. I was like, oh, am I going to get all the answers that I want? But then I saw that backstory chapter and I was like, oh man, he's playing the long game with us. Like, we're going to get all the answers we need. Like he wanted, I think, to unclutter that low point for us. Like, he didn't want to like dump a bunch of information and backstory for Kaladin. And like we said, Zoran, it's like, yeah, drip feed it a little bit, have the reader be like, okay, what the hell is going on with this guy? And then over time, get to know it. Because the whole point of Kaladin, in my mind, after having read these books, is like, I think that he is a very good study on like mental health, like imposter syndrome and feelings of guilt and inadequacy and being undeserving of things, and like all of those feelings that everybody always feels. I mean, the Kaladin chapters are brutal. Like, just to warn everybody going forward. I mean, and you probably got a taste of it in this read too, because in the last chapter, he almost commits suicide. The reason I bring that up is because Kaladin is basically talked out of it by Syl, who we meet in that first chapter. What did you guys think about Syl, the wind spren? I love Syl so much. But
Zoran, you have thoughts?
Zoran has thoughts.
I love her.
I picture her as Joy from Inside Out.
That's actually good.
I was thinking of her more Tinkerbell, but no,
totally.
she's Joy.
Yeah.
She's a blue. She's Joy, but she's also like the color blue of sadness.
Yeah, she's like Joy and like Cortana mixed together. It's interesting too, because Syl, it's explained to us very quickly that spren are okay. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, because like we just had this conversation about how Sanderson has very good balance with show and tell, and it's like, dude, what better way could you fucking genius, like you have like these life forms that basically add so much to the world building and also tell the reader what these characters are feeling. You bastard. Like, you creative bastard, man. Like, it's so cool. He's just, at any time, he can just be like, oh yeah, the fear spren popped up. So now you know that they're scared. I didn't have to tell you shit. And that adds to the world. It's so efficient and it's so cool. But like, also, the spren are so embedded into this world. Like, they're almost like not even interesting to people. Right. Like, and so when Syl kind of says his name and like starts talking to him and like kind of goes back and forth with him, Kaladin's like, what the hell is up with this? Is really weird. Like, spren don't do this.
I liked it too, because you can tell that Syl also just like doesn't know what the fuck's going on either. She's like, why am I talking to you? Like, I don't know why I have a name. I don't know why I have a nickname, which I think is fun too, because you they can uncover it together, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's also a really interesting way to show that a character is special, but like through another character, right? Like we're so used to like, this character is the chosen one, right? But like Kaladin is clearly special, but what is making us realize his specialness is not necessarily him, the character. It's these events kind of happening around him, and that includes Syl and sort of her transformation in light of being in light of finding him, basically. And it's like, we know that Kaladin is special because of this other character and the effect of just being around him is having on her. And I think that's a really creative way to show, the specialness or like the chosenness of a character.
And for me, I was like kind of shocked because like I said earlier, it's been 4 years since I've read this. I didn't remember Syl showing up so early.
Me neither. Yeah.
In my mind, I was like, oh yeah, Syl's gonna be here probably around halfway. And I was like, I didn't realize that she would be here in like the actual first chapter of the book.
Like the second page of the first chapter. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was
really
oh my
quickly.
God, this is so early for you, girlfriend. I didn't realize she'd be here right by now.
I'm the opposite. For some reason, I thought that he already knew her.
Oh,
I was
really?
like, where the heck is she?
They'd be friends forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Kaladin is, in these slave wagons. He's not stoked. Obviously, he's tried to escape multiple times, and like the conditions for these slaves is just awful. They're riding out these high storms, which is just another point to Sanderson for incredible world building. The high storms, these horrible storms that I don't think it's a spoiler, but these storms always go the same direction. It's important to remember.
Yeah.
They're always, and that's why these cities like Carbranth is built in a certain way. The barracks and stuff, like everything's built with their roofs or the buildings themselves like facing away to like kind of like lean away from or lean into the storm or whatever. So it really affects the world build. So they're sitting out these high storms and stuff, and Kaladin's just like, oh my God, how could this get any worse? And then it gets so much fucking worse. Like, dude, oh my God. Like I've read this is my fourth time reading these, and the line, this is going to be a bad one. Like, oh, that hits so hard. Like, so he gets to the bridge runners and stuff, and we as the reader, we don't know what the hell's going on, right? Kaladin doesn't know what the hell's going on. He's just like, oh, cool. Like, we're just building bridges. Like, not bad. And then all the other men too are just like, oh, this is great. Like, we got, labor detail, like whatever. We're gonna get food, and there's like Bright Lords all around here, and they'll totally take care of us because Bright Lords are awesome, and this hierarchy is totally working out in our favor. And then it's so weird reading this for the first time when it's like they lift up these bridges and they start running, and it's like the way that Sanderson describes it, it's like Kaladin, is he not wearing shoes?
No, he's not wearing shoes in this.
And it's like everything's like all sharp and like crustacean and wet and like just, and so his feet are like getting totally fucked up. They're running for, it said like an hour. And it's like, have you ever run for an hour? Like, that's the worst.
I barely run for 2 minutes.
Yeah. And like, so running like with like this giant bridge on your shoulders and no one else is talking to you. You can't see anything. Right. And then Gaz, the main, not the main guy, the what is he? Just like in charge of all the bridge runners?
He's like a supervisor.
He's like a manager.
Yeah, he's like a manager. He's like a shitty like floor manager.
Yeah, basically.
But like he puts Kaladin in the front, and Kaladin's like, "Oh, this is nice. I can see. Great." And then slowly we start to realize, like they're running straight into arrows. Like this is a massacre. Oh my God. Like it's so cool because Kaladin, like when we get some of his internal dialogue about all of this, he's just like we know at this point that Kaladin has been not only involved in warfare, but like, a person of authority. He knows a lot about warfare. So Kaladin is like, why the hell are they doing this? Like, this doesn't make any sense. They're just like throwing perfectly good people into these arrows like this. They don't seem to be really like gaining any ground. Like we're just kind of like doing these skirmishes, and there's like some weird thing that they're like harvesting in the middle, which is going to definitely come into play later. But man, like it's just, when I read that over that line again, like this is going to be a bad one or something like that. I didn't highlight the line, but it was like, and then Kaladin's like, oh man, I'm so excited to go back home, after they put the first bridge across. And they're just like, no, bro. No. Oh
They're
my
like, we're not even halfway.
I think they did
No.
like 7 crossings or something.
That's
I
Ugh.
just read
crazy.
that like an hour ago, so it's fresh.
But it was so nice of them that they let them take their time on the way back.
Oh
That
yeah.
That's
was
really
nice.
sweet.
It was
And
so
so they could
sweet.
Work-life
think about
balance.
it. Yeah, they could think about the massacre that just happened. And then it says that, like, what is it, like 38 out of 40 people had been killed by arrows. And then like that part where like the guy, like the one guy that had like stuck it out for a while that Kaladin had like recognized, got shot in like the back. And he's like bleeding out. And he's bleeding out like into like this teenager's eye. Like,
Mhm.
ugh, dude.
It kind of reminds me about, I remember reading at some point that when the boats were like going to Normandy in World War II, like the first 4 rows of people were just guaranteed not to make it, because as soon as the boats opened, the gunshots would hit and like they would go through like the first 4 rows of people. And it reminds me a lot of that, of just like,
So
if you're
much.
in those first couple of rows, you just know, like you're just running forward and you know you're not going to make it, which is just like such a wild visual to have.
No shields, nothing. Ah,
Shields are expensive.
and they slow you down. Like that was one of the other like explanations, because Kaladin's just like, why aren't they at least using shields? And it's like, it's because it'll slow the bridge runners down, and they need to get there as fast as possible. And it is nice that sometimes, you know, they get there and there's no Parshendi there, so that's nice.
What a great
They
day.
never know. Oh my god! So it makes sense that Kaladin, you know, he sees all of this. Some time goes by, and then there's like this chasm next to where the bridge crews are sleeping, where they're not supposed to go over there, but the guards kind of like will look the other way, because it's like the one mercy that's granted to them, like the mercy of them being able to end their own life by jumping into this chasm. Which is, it's just like, it's like Sanderson was at his desk and he's like, all right, how can we make this way more bleak? Like, let's really, because earlier, Jason, you said that we meet Kaladin at his low point. I don't know if that was the low point though.
Yeah, we meet him. Well, yeah, I feel like though that is all part of his introduction. Like I feel like
Sure, yeah.
everything up to the moment where he like turns around and goes back up the hill and smashes Gaz in the face. Like, to me, all of that is like Kaladin's introduction, right? And that point, that turning point, is where it's like, okay, and now we begin, kind of a thing, right? Like that's the moment where it's like, okay, now we start, right? So I still kind of feel like we meet him at his low point, because all of that is our introduction to Kaladin as a character and who he is and like what it might take to break him, before we like really get into his story of where, like, what he's going to do through these books.
What did you guys think about Syl and like her not explanation, but her kind of like argument for why Kaladin shouldn't like kill himself? What did you think about that? What she said to him?
Like when she said one more try.
I think she was saying like these bridge runners can't go any lower. Like, you can't hurt these people any more than they're already hurt.
I really liked it. I thought it was really well done, especially with Shallan. Is that how you guys pronounce her name?
Oh, we're gonna talk about Shallan, yeah.
But like, yeah, like because something very similar was told to her about having to go and like try one more time, because nothing can be like, she's already at, like, she's already fucked. Like, why not try one more time? And it was kind of like the mirror between the two of them in that moment. I really liked that, because it just was kind of the exact same thought, where it's like, these people are going to die anyway. You might as well try one more time.
Yeah, like, it can't get any worse from here. Like,
Yeah.
like, you really are at the lowest point here. If you're standing on a ledge about to jump off of it, then anything that you do to try to help these other people also not jump off that ledge, it's like, that's only a plus, like, give it another shot. And that is like a big thing with Kaladin moving forward in these books too, is like, I think Jason just said, it's like, what's going to break this guy, and like, in my mind, it's like, there's all different kinds of breaking people, like sometimes people break in a way that is really intense and really sad. And sometimes people break in a way where it's like, okay, I have to take action now, and Kaladin's that kind of person where he's just like, he's raised as a surgeon, He's used to seeing people situations at their lowest point, used to seeing things that, without his intervention, they could go really badly. And I think that's why that chapter of him talking to his dad is like, it's so, so important to know where Kaladin is coming from. Like, not only was it Syl who convinced him to go try to help, but also he's been trying to help people this entire time. Like the deaths of someone named Tien and Sen and like all these other people that Kaladin knows, they weigh so heavily on him. And it's funny because like typically I am not a big fan of the character trope of like they care too much, but I do think that this is extremely well done. Like Kaladin is a very compelling character.
Yeah, Kaladin has like this moral pinpoint where he feels like he has to protect people and he has to save them, and if he doesn't do that, he feels like a failure, and if he fails, then he's nothing. Right. And so if he doesn't like execute on those like on these like pillars of character that he's like set for himself, and I feel like we all can relate, like we all have like a standard that we hold ourselves to, and if we don't meet those standards, that probably way too high, and we always feel like we're in this cycle of failure over and over again. Like it really like it beats down and weighs down on your conscience day after day, and it's really hard to dig yourself out of that hole. And I feel like Kaladin's kind of in that hole right now. What else does he have to lose by like trying again? Like he can't protect these people, but he can eventually give these people the tools to protect themselves, which we're eventually going to see in like the next part. Fingies crossed.
Yeah, and it really, there is that question of, and I wonder if like doctors in our world struggle with it sometimes, where it's like, maybe not struggle with it, but there is a question of like, if you can help, do you have a moral responsibility to? Like if you have the capability and the knowledge, so Kaladin knows how to lead people, Kaladin knows how to heal people, he can actually do some good here. Does he have a moral obligation to do that good?
Kaladin would tell you, yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because we see him kind of arguing with his dad earlier in his life of him not feeling that way. Like, it's interesting that he is a character who feels like he, like you said, he cares too much, right? Like he cares too much. He feels like he has to help everybody. He feels like it's his job to save everyone. But it's almost, you kind of see him almost critical of his dad for being the same way, and his dad is in some ways even being like used by people,
he's not accepting money.
Like he's kind of getting shafted because he's caring too much and he's doing all these nice things for people, and Kaladin's like, what are you doing? Like, you have to charge people for these things. And so it's interesting to see him be so resistant to that as a kid and then kind of grow into a very similar character, which often happens with children and their parents. So it's kind of wild to see that transformation.
He had that conversation with his dad where his dad was like, Kaladin, there's two types of people in the world. There's those who save lives and there's those who take lives. And Kaladin's like, well, I just invented a third kind, and it's like, what if you could save lives by taking them? Because Dad, when I grow up, I want to be in the army. I want to hold steel. So like,
I want Zoran to narrate this book to me
in the widowy voice.
I talk in that voice like unironically so much. It should really be studied. It's quite embarrassing.
But then in the like when he's older, he has like a third type of person too, and I can't remember what it was, but it was. Do you guys remember what he says when he's talking to like Syl or something?
Well, I mean, like he has like a bit of internal dialogue where he's remembering that conversation with his dad, and then he's like, "But there is a third one, and it's the victims. It's just the people that die, and I'm one of those."
Yeah,
like I guess I'm just, and it is very clearly spelled out. He's like, "I am a victim." Like we're not beating around the bush here. That is, and honestly, yeah, like all of these bridge runners are victims. I would say. It is the third party, but I guess he's almost telling himself, like, I don't have to be the victim. Or if I'm going to be the victim, I'm going to do as much good as I can while doing that, which is, I think, another reason why Kaladin is such a compelling character, because, Kaladin has, like, a ton of integrity. And integrity is, like, such an interesting aspect of a person, you know, like how much they have, like when you know that you can do something right, and nobody's around to like make sure you do it. You know, like nobody's telling Kaladin to do this. Like he's like, it's not like Gaz is like, all right, I'm putting you in charge and it's up to you to whip these people into shape. That wouldn't be a very interesting storyline, you know? Like if Kaladin felt like he was being forced to, or else he would die or something like that. Like that's not as interesting as like Kaladin being conflicted, not even wanting to be the person that does this. Like it's almost like that's another bit of him being that's like he's like a victim of his own caring and like his own ability, and he's like, damn it, like I can help, fuck, like I have to do it, I have to.
He's the kid that ends up doing the whole group project because nobody else did their part. It's like, well, I want to get an A, so I guess I have to do this.
Like it has to happen. Yeah, like I mean, it's like either that or everybody fails. That's a really good analogy, actually. That's really good.
I'll just do all the parts.
Everyone fails anyway.
Right, exactly. And all these bridge runners are so low at this point, right? Like they're all just like, the way that it's explained is, you know, some of them like wrap their blankets around their heads so that they can't see anything or hear anything, and they're just trying to block the world out.
I read that and I was like, I want to try that.
It reminded me of that part of The Office where Erin like puts her hair in front of her face and she's like, when I was a kid, my hair was my room.
Oh my god.
Wait, I feel like I missed this part. Are they doing like the blanket blindfold while they're running the bridge, or just while they're trying to sleep?
No, it's like when they're all trying to like, because there's like periods of time between the bridge runs where they're all just kind of like stare off into space. Like they have to do some work and stuff, but they don't do a bridge run every day.
Right.
So there's like time for them to all kind of just like sit around and think about the fact that they're probably going to die horribly really soon. And so some of them, it was explained that like they have blankets, but they only get one blanket, and you can choose to be cold or you can choose to be sore, you know, but you can't do both. So you can use the blanket as like a pad on the rock, or you can use it to warm yourself. But then some of them just wrap the blanket around their heads to just like, oh man. And I've been there, not like in a stone barrack doing bridge runs, but I've totally like, you know, had days where it's just like, all right, I'm just under the covers and it's not happening today, you know. But
I would 100% be a blanket head wrapper.
Yes, I think I would.
I was out of the three.
There are some days where I was just like, I could just be having like a really bad day for whatever reason, and I'll just like take my contacts out and I'll like put them in their little contact case, and I'm like, I've seen enough. Like I'm done with today. So
I've never heard of somebody doing that. I don't even want to see it.
I hope that happens in the book. I hope there's a bridge run.
I just like take my contacts
out there.
I'm clocking out. Like I've seen enough.
It's like the equivalent of like I think like when you get off work from like a particularly stressful shift and you just drive home in silence.
Oh my god, I've had many of those shifts. Evan, you get it. You've worked in a restaurant before.
Oh my god, it's so loud and like everything's. It's so there's so much noise, and it's just chaos for like 6 hours.
You know
and then you get in your car and you're just like.
Kaladin needs a cigarette. I think that would solve some of this problem. Like he just needs.
He needs a break.
He needs a break.
Bridge running is the equivalent of working in a restaurant.
I stand by that. Literally the exact same thing. So I want to shift gears to Shallan. That's how I pronounce it. I've heard it pronounced Shallan, but I pronounce it Shallan. And that's how
the audiobook pronounces it Shallan. So I feel like that's the correct.
So I've heard a lot of, and I've heard and I've read a lot of flack about Shallan. And I want to set the record straight. As far as my opinion of Shallan, I think Shallan kicks ass. I think she's a fucking fantastic character. Like, I don't really know where like all the vitriol comes from. Like, where like she's not a bad character at all. And honestly, I think that as we move forward through this series, her chapters start to become much more informative about the world and the actual like story that's going on than the Kaladin chapters do. You know, I mean, the Kaladin chapters are like. It's just like, this is really shitty for like a while, you know? But with Shallan, it's like, I feel like she's kind of our eye into the wider world almost. Like she's kind of like, she's figuring things out that are kind of the bedrock of what's really going on and like the secrets that we're about to really start learning. And I know that that's maybe a tiny bit of a spoiler, but just if you're listening right now and you read the Shallan chapters and you were like, this is boring, she's just like in rooms talking to people, totally. But also there's a lot happening in those chapters later, so just stick it out. The only thing I would say with Shallan, I do think that the quips, it's just like a little like,
I was going to say, I don't particularly enjoy the quips, but I do like her. I do think she's very much like a product of her upbringing. And I think it's nice. Like, I think that as she grows and like is a little less naive.
Are you talking about the quips about like her religion with like, what is it, Vadenism?
Well, there's a parts on the ship when she's talking to the captain, and then there's the parts with I can't remember the guy's name, but when the art, there's that part too. But like, oh yeah, that was a little cringy. There's some cringy dialogue going. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. There's some definite cringy dialogue going on. One thing that it just kind of like trips me up about Shallan, at least like this first part, and like I said, I think the Shallan chapters really evolve into like, I'm so excited to read another Shallan chapter. But I feel like Sanderson wants it both ways. Like, he wants Shallan to be like this kind of like apprehensive, like hesitant, kind of like nervous girl, like, oh no, like I'm just like a rich girl and I don't know anything. And then like, as soon as the moment calls for it, she's like so sharp. She's so fucking sharp. And it's just like, dude, which one is it though? I don't know. Am I wrong about that? Like,
I mean, I think they make it pretty clear that there are aspects, like she is very, very educated, right? Like she's a very educated person, but she also doesn't really have any street smarts. And I think that is made pretty clear by the fact that she doesn't really know how to haggle. There are aspects of the world that she is just completely naive to, but she also knows a lot of information, right? Like, so she has a lot of, she's done a lot of research. She knows a lot of information, but there are aspects of the real world that she's just experiencing for the first time. And I think that is made pretty clear through, what we see her go through at the bookstore and, and just the way that she interacts with the world when she's just out on the streets doing her thing. This controversial opinion, of what we've read so far, I prefer the Shallan chapters over the Kaladin chapters.
Really?
Why is that?
Huh?
Aaron just popped in like, what are you talking about?
I really like her. I really like, her story is a story of like, a character who is, very educated and like going to look for this more education, but also her story is sort of a heist story, right? Like deeper down, it's like she's got this like plan to like commit a heist to like save her family. And I think that is like, it kind of comes out of nowhere. It's like, I'm going out here to be able to be this woman's ward, to learn a bunch of stuff, but actually here's what I'm secretly doing. And I just find that really fun. And I don't know. I really enjoy reading about her character, and I enjoy the part of the world where she's at. Like Kaladin's world is very, like monotone and dark and bleak, and Shallan's over here just like spending money, buying books, planning to steal stuff in the high society, and that's just more my vibe.
And Carbranth is like a really cool city. It's like the city of bells and like there's like the Palladium and stuff, and there's like this is where a bunch of Ardents are, and it's really cool to see, like for most of this book, we're just kind of seeing, or most of this part that we just read, the Kaladin chapters at least, we're seeing, like you said, Jason, it's the Shattered Plains. It's interesting as hell, but it's also a little bit bleak, a little bit monotone. And, Shallan, like I said before, it's like she is our eye to the wider world, and Carbranth is a bustling city. We're seeing it's almost like it's like presenting more than just like, okay, here's like this kind of like war situation. It's like, well, why is this war being fought? What's at stake here? What is the state of this world right now? And Shallan's chapters are a really good look into that. Like, look at Carbranth. It's this beautiful, colorful city full of like religion and money and commerce and like all this stuff. And Shallan is very new to her, and just like it's new to us, the reader. But Shallan appreciates it. and it makes me appreciate it too. I'm like, oh damn, this is really cool.
And I really loved, don't get me wrong, the Kaladin chapters are the better story here. They are the better written, better story.
I don't know, you kind of sold the Shallan
for sure. But like when Shallan is talking about how she draws people and how she captures memories and how the artistry of all that, I just think it's so beautiful. Like the way that she describes, like I'm going through and I'm like highlighting and tabbing my copy, and I highlighted so many aspects of how she talks about art and like drawing humans and capturing the world around her, because I just think it's a really beautiful idea. And I think it is really cool to see that that this vision of like I look around the world, my world, and I look for beautiful moments and beautiful people, and I add them to my collection of interesting things I see in the world, right? And that is juxtaposed with Kaladin's story that is just like everything is awful every day, right? and I think I think the two of them strike a really nice balance. And I think the Shallan chapters provide like a nice, they're like a nice break. It's like, oh, this is getting a little heavy. I need to go hang out in the city for a while and buy some new outfits. So,
and I think Erin put it really well earlier when she said that, like Kaladin, Shallan kind of got to a point where she was like, oh my God, like I have nothing to lose. Like it's either this or I go back home empty handed. So let's try again. Shallan kind of like petitioning Yasna over and over again. It kind of reminded me, did you guys know that in, I don't know if it's like Orthodox Jewish or like there's a Jewish tradition. Like if you want to convert to Judaism, a rabbi will deny you 3 times. They'll be like, nah, this isn't the one for you. Go do a little bit more research. I'm not sure which denomination or sect of Judaism it does that, but I have heard that that's a thing where, and in my mind, I felt like that's kind of what Yasna was doing. I think like the first time she was really like, whatever, I don't care. And then the second time was a test. Like the second time was like, all right, I'm going to tell this girl to fuck off. If she comes back, that's why she told the guard or whatever to let her know if she comes back. And it was just, oh man, Yasna is so cool.
I remember the first time I read it, because it was quite a few years ago. Reading it now as someone who's 30, I was like, dang. They're like, when I read it first time around, I was like, she's so old. Now I'm like,
Yasna,
she's so young.
Yeah, she's 34. Yeah. She's so accomplished.
They talk about her like she's an old spinster a bit.
Yeah, no, that literally is how she's presented.
I mean, she lights the paperwork. Like she is doing paperwork and reading, and she uses money to light as a light. I just think she's so cool. Oh, I need to do my work. I just set up some money for the glow.
I think that's like a thing in this world. I can't remember too specifically, but I think that their money is used as light.
Yeah, they like carry it around too in their dark
fairly
hallways.
Frequently. Yeah,
but I just think that's such a visual.
She has like a big bowl of it.
Yeah, that she's got a bowl of money lighting her work. Go off, Queen! I love it.
Yeah. What do you guys think is? I guess I don't want to phrase it like that because we all know. I was going to ask what you think is going to happen with that, but we all know what's going to happen with that.
I actually don't remember. The great thing about it is I have a terrible memory. Yeah. So there are maybe 3 specific scenes that I remember really, really well from this book, and like one specific scene that I remember really well from book 2. And that's,
I know which scene you're thinking of.
It's like the climax. The climax of book 2 is insane.
It's fucking crazy.
But everything else, I don't really remember at all. Like I'm there for the most part. I'm kind of like going in blind because I have such bad memory.
Reading it for the first time again for me, which is like something I'm like a little jealous about over you, Evan. It's like you have a really good eye for like little details in books. Like you always remember those and you're able to recall them. Whereas like I finished reading yesterday and I'm like already forgetting things that you're bringing to the table for this podcast. And I'm like, oh my God, you remember like the blankets over the head? Like
Zoran's like, who's Kaladin?
Yeah, like money lights.
I mean, I think that my retention is solely just due to me. This is the 4th time I've read this. I did it purely just text the first time, and then I listened to it on audiobook, and then I listened to the graphic audio version of it, which if you're listening right now and you don't know what that is, it's basically just the way that they describe it. Their like tagline for graphic audio is a movie in your mind, and like straight up, like I mean it is like there's sound effects, there's music. I don't know if they read like every bit of text for the graphic audio, I can't remember.
No,
but
I think they cut out
it
some
was,
aspects, I think, if I remember
but
right.
I loved it so much. It was so cool. So I would recommend graphic audio, not for the first read, but if this is like your second or your third read, go check out the graphic audio. It's totally worth like $30 or whatever, however much it costs.
Not sponsored by Graphic Audio.
No, we're not. We're not sponsored by anybody.
But you could change that
But yeah,
if you're listening to this.
I know that the graphic audio team is listening to this right now. So
would you like to light up
appreciate
this
you.
podcast with your light up money?
This next part of the conversation is brought to you by Squarespace.
or Skillshare.
It's Skillshare.
Oh my
3
God.
emerald bromes per month. You too can have a membership.
We're sponsored by what's the game? What's that game?
Raid Shadow Legends. That has to be the one
Raid
you're
Shadow
thinking of.
Legends. That's the one. Oh my god, man! Raid Shadow Legends. What a piece of shit game.
Now they're not going to
refuse.
sponsor us.
I don't give a shit. I don't want them. I don't want it. Not on my podcast. I tried it. I played it. I was duped. Because it was so heavily advertised, and I was like, all right, it's Raid Shadow Legends. It's probably pretty cool. And it's not. It's not cool.
Those ads work on me though. After about 5 times, I download the app.
Mm-hmm.
But then I delete it immediately because it's
You're like, oh, that's enough of that.
advertising.
I will say I mentioned this earlier, I'm doing like a highlight, like a full annotation this time around, which I've been wanting to do with this series for a long time. And I shared a screenshot of just what I've gotten to so far, of just like my like tags, like what I'm highlighting and what color. And I had a bunch of people really mad that I am highlighting Syl with a like greenish highlighter, not blue. But if you play a lot of Final Fantasy, wind is green. And so makes sense. And I had a lot of people really upset that I didn't have, they were like, how are you not highlighting Dalinar? And I was like, he's not here yet.
Not here yet.
So,
and that's
how dare you
that's
not have all of your bases covered?
Exactly.
Come
How
on,
dare
Jason.
I? But what color is Dalinar going to be? Purple? Okay, great.
I was going to say purple.
Purple's pretty good.
Yeah, it's going to be purple.
I might cut this up. I picture Dalinar as Liam Neeson, personally.
Okay.
Why would you cut that out? That's great.
So I feel like us reading The Way of Kings this week came at like a really good time because the cover for Wind and Truth was revealed the other day.
It certainly was.
What did you guys think of the cover?
Way to tie it back around, Zoran.
I know.
I feel like I have no concept of it because I haven't read books 3 and 4. I just look at it and go, that looks cool.
It looks cool.
Where is Dalinar, if you couldn't tell?
I couldn't.
Huh?
It's Daddy Dalinar.
That's Dalinar on the cover?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Yeah, that makes sense because he's got the book and stuff.
Oh.
His fat.
I don't know. I thought the cover was cool, but I don't know.
I don't think any of
they
these
hyped
covers
it
are
up a lot
particularly
more.
like
Yeah.
that great.
I think the cover for The Way of Kings is like it's
best.
not going to be topped. It's like the best fantasy book cover of all time, in my opinion.
Really?
the
That makes
way-
me want to grab it and look at it and see.
Look at the cover. Yeah.
I do think they hyped it up for a while, and then I saw it and I was like, I don't really know why I was so excited for it.
It might be fun. This is like way down the line, but I am going to be getting the Stormlight. Now it's the Cosmere RPG, so maybe we'll have to do a session of that. That'd be really fun.
Ooh,
I would love that.
'Cause that
Can we do that like virtually?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not out yet. It just finished its Kickstarter. It was the most successful RPG on Kickstarter of all time, which is pretty crazy.
Of course it was.
But it'll be out. I think it'll be out next year. And so once it comes out, but yeah, we can definitely do it virtually because I'll have all the books and stuff, and I can get you guys all the information you need to play.
I'm down, even though we've been saying we're going to play D&D for like 2 years.
Well, we can't do predictions because we already know.
I don't even remember, dude.
Yeah, we could predict.
I think we could predict because I only remember one
We
other
can?
thing.
Yeah.
I only remember one other thing that
That's
happens in this
fine.
book.
Okay, cool.
I can't even tell you how this book ends.
I could like literally sit here and explain like at least the first 2 books to you. The third book is a little murky for me because I've only read it once.
Do we get Dalinar's POV the next part?
Yeah, we do. And so that's one of the things that like I kind of fought with my brother about reading this because I was just like, dude, because he was always like, I don't know what to read. I want to read books again. I want to start. And I was just like, dude, just read Stormlight. Like, I know what's best for you. Just do it. And then he would always he's literally like 3 times in a row. He like would get like halfway through a Shallan chapter and he was just like, I hate this, I can't do this anymore. But I kept telling him, like, get to Dalinar, like, please get to Dalinar. And everybody listening right now, if you haven't kept reading, we've talked about Dalinar a little bit. My personal favorite parts of all of these books are the Dalinar parts. Dalinar is like far and away my favorite character.
It's so interesting. I wonder if my opinion will change, because I remember the first time I read these, the two characters I really liked were Kaladin and Shallan, and every time a Dalinar chapter happened, I feel like I checked out.
Honestly, I feel like I like the Kaladin chapters the least, but that's not to say that I don't like them or anything at all. Like, I think that they're fantastic, but I like what's being uncovered in the Shallan chapters. And like Jason said, I mean, like, the heist kind of aspect of it is really cool. Her backstory is really cool. The stakes and, like, you know, her being so desperate is really cool. And then also the Dalinar stuff is just like, oh, like, I don't want to get into it because it's kind of a spoiler, but damn, like, I just love Dalinar so much. He's like, no, I can't do it. It's a spoiler.
But that's good. I really want to see, going in kind of sort of blind, I want to see if my opinion of those chapters changes. Because I do remember the first time, like, I completely even forgot that he was a main character when I sat down to read these books again, because I only really remember Kaladin and Shallan. Because every time Dalinar showed up, I was like, eh.
I mean, he's like grumpy.
I really thought like Dalinar would be your type, Jason.
We'll see. Like I said, my reading taste has changed a lot in the last 4 years, so maybe it'll be different this time. Maybe I'll be like into Dalinar.
Jason, when you read this for the very first time, like, what were your thoughts about these books? I mean, were you blown away by them, or?
I don't remember my feeling too much on the first book. I think I hadn't read enough fantasy yet to really be like, wow, this is, you know, really, really good. Like, I didn't really have a framing point for it. And I think that was a little bit challenging. And also, they were like far and away the longest books I had ever read at that time. And so I think that kind of was challenging too. I will say, I remember I was working when I was still working for the company I was working for before. I had to do this like 4-hour drive through Alabama at one point, and that was when I listened to the final, like, the ending of the second book. And I remember thinking, like, this is so freaking cool, and that's why I remember that so well. But I don't remember the only other. There's only one other scene in book one that I even remember happening. So I'm interested to see. A lot of it is going to be like the first time I'm kind of experiencing it.
Because you said you haven't read Oathbringer.
I have not.
Okay, so I feel like that's also a reason, even though like by now you would have been with like all the main characters for like 2,000 pages by now, but like Oathbringer is Dalinar's book.
Yeah.
So that also might be why you don't have like a full opinion on Dalinar yet.
Yeah, but we'll see. It could change. I'm open to having my opinion changed. I am not, because I don't really remember anything. I'm not like anti Dalinar. I could be swayed.
I'm really excited to meet Adolin for the first time again, because I remember just like loving that pretty voice so much. Like 20-year-old Zoran was like head over heels in love with Adolin.
Just like every other girl.
Yeah, I'm just.
He's batting them away.
I'm not different. I love him.
I am like other girls.
Like, Daddy, I love him.
Aaron, do you find yourself like more excited about this read than the first time through, like knowing a little bit more?
Yes, I actually am a lot more excited. I also think I just have I have so much more experience in adult fantasy now. Like, pretty much I read The Name of the Wind, and then I read The Name of the Wind like 8 times in a row, and then I read The Way of Kings. So it, like, I think I don't know, I just have so much more experience reading like big epic fantasies now that I think it'll just be so much cooler to be able to dive in, and I'm very excited. Also, I'm very excited to talk with you guys about it because I feel like I missed a lot of things. I'm gonna have to like start maybe tabbing the book or something.
Yeah, I think that has also changed already how I feel about the books, because the first time I read both of them, it was purely on audio. You know, and now that I'm doing like a full like immersive read where I'm listening to it while I have the book in front of me, and I'm tabbing and I'm highlighting, and I'm just catching so much more than I did the first time. And that is also like changing my feelings about the book as well, because the reason I read these the first time was because I had just finished reading the Mistborn trilogy. And I was so in love with that trilogy. Like, nothing could possibly top how I felt about that trilogy. And then I went into The Way of Kings, and I definitely feel like I didn't love The Way of Kings as much as I probably could have, because I was not over Mistborn yet. Like, I was still so in love with those 3 books that I couldn't possibly, like, nothing was going to replace them at that point. Whereas now I feel like much more open to like really giving these books their fair chance.
I'm really looking forward to this, guys, and I'm looking forward to some other people joining us here pretty soon. We'll have people kind of in and out, but everybody that's listening right now, thank you so much for joining us for this episode and for following along with this big, gigantic, huge, epic ass series. I'm so excited to keep reading. I'm gonna go read it right now.
And what are we reading to for next time?
We're reading all the way to the end of part 2.
Cool.
It's a pretty big swath. Yeah. Next episode will probably be even longer than this one. But yeah, everybody, thank you so much. Goodbye until next time. And Jason, Aaron, and Zoran, thank you so much for joining me and the rest of the listeners on this wild ride. But until next time, everybody, thank you so much for listening. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. And of course, happy reading.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.